The thief, that's what they called him, a thug in a janitor's uniform who had no business being anywhere near a woman like her. They had his name, they had his photo, they had a signed complaint from a man in a three-piece suit who sat in the front pew of First Baptist every Sunday and coached Little League on Saturdays, a man the whole town of Harlan Creek, Kentucky, trusted with their children, their elderly, their money. And they had Darnell Oakes, 34 years old, a custodian at Harlan Creek Regional Medical Center, 9 years on the job without a single write-up, sitting in a holding cell at 2 in the morning, wondering how a Tuesday afternoon had turned into this. It had started the way most things started for Darnell, quietly, without ceremony. He was finishing the east hallway on the 3rd floor when he heard it, a sound like something between a moan and a word, coming from the stairwell near the fire exit. He almost kept walking. The cart was heavy. The mop bucket needed changing, and he had 2 more floors before the end of his shift. He almost kept walking. But he didn't. The door to the stairwell was heavy and slow. He pushed it open with his shoulder and the sound got louder. An old woman, wedged between the railing and the 2nd step, her left leg bent in a way that made something cold move through his chest. She was wearing a hospital gown, thin cotton, nothing underneath, and she had one hand pressed flat against the concrete wall like she was trying to remember how to stand up. "Ma'am." He moved fast, dropping to one knee beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She looked at him. Her eyes were blue and cloudy and somewhere far away. "I need to find my son," she said. "He's waiting for me downstairs." Her name was on her bracelet, Harriet Solberg, age 81, room 314. He didn't think about protocol. He didn't think about the form he was supposed to fill out, the number he was supposed to call, the chain of command he was supposed to follow before touching a patient. He just took off his jacket, the gray one with the hospital logo on the chest, and he wrapped it around her shoulders, and he sat down next to her on that cold concrete step, and he said, "I'm going to stay right here with you until we get some help, okay? You're not going anywhere alone." He called the nurse's station from the wall phone 6 feet away, keeping one hand on her arm so she wouldn't try to stand. He stayed until the nurses came. He stayed while they lifted her onto the gurney. He handed one of them her paper slippers that had fallen off on the bottom step. Then he went back to his cart and finished the hallway and didn't say anything about it to anyone. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, Harlan Creek Police Department had a complaint filed against him for elder abuse, unlawful restraint, and theft of personal property. The personal property in question was a ring. Harriet Solberg had come into the hospital wearing a sapphire ring on her right hand, her late husband's mother's ring, according to the man who filed the complaint. By the time she was back in her room on Thursday morning, the ring was gone. The man who filed the complaint was her son. His name was Patrick Solberg. He was 53, a partner at a regional land development firm, and Harriet's only living child. He had been in Nashville for a conference when his mother wandered out of her room and into the stairwell. He arrived at the hospital Thursday afternoon, spoke to the floor nurses, reviewed the incident log, and identified, among the staff who had responded, one Darnell Oakes, custodial services, who had been alone with his mother for approximately 4 minutes before other staff arrived. Patrick Solberg went home that night and called his attorney. The attorney called the police. The police came to Darnell's apartment at 6:15 Friday morning when he was making coffee and getting ready for his early shift. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He stood in his doorway in a white undershirt and sweatpants, hands open at his sides, and he said, "I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll come with you." He didn't own a sapphire ring. He didn't know Harriet Solberg's ring existed until the detective across the metal table described it to him. Oval cut, gold setting, small chip on the lower left facet. He had never been in room 314. He had found her in the stairwell, called for help, waited, and left. That was everything he knew. The detective listened, wrote something down. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at Darnell the way people look at a stain. They're deciding whether to bother cleaning up. "You've had a record?" the detective asked. "Misdemeanor. Possession. I was 19, 15 years ago." The detective wrote something else down. Darnell was released on Saturday morning on his own recognizance, pending investigation. He went home. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time without doing anything. Then he called his supervisor at the hospital and told him what had happened. His supervisor said he was sorry, but until the investigation was resolved, Darnell would need to take a leave of absence. 9 years, not one write-up. The story moved through Harlan Creek the way stories move through small towns, faster than light, slower than truth. By Sunday, it had changed shape 3 times. By Tuesday, the version most people had heard was that a hospital janitor had been caught stealing jewelry off a semi-conscious elderly woman. Some people added details that weren't there. Someone said he'd been caught on camera. Someone else said he'd done it before at another hospital in another county years ago. Nobody asked where they'd heard it. Nobody needed to. Darnell didn't go to church that Sunday. He stayed home with the blinds down and applied for a public defender because he couldn't afford an attorney. The public defender assigned to his case was a 28-year-old woman named Simone Greer, who had graduated from University of Kentucky Law 2 years earlier and was carrying 41 open cases. She was competent and overworked, and she told him the truth, which was that without evidence to contradict Patrick Solberg's complaint and without the ring turning up somewhere else, the optics were not good. "What does that mean?" Darnell asked. "It means we need something," she said. "Anything. A witness, a timestamp, something that changes the picture." Darnell thought about the stairwell, the concrete steps, the wall phone. He thought about Harriet Solberg's eyes somewhere far away, looking for a son who was in Nashville. "Can they ask her?" he said. Simone looked at him carefully. "Her son has medical power of attorney. Her dementia diagnosis is on record." "She recognized me," Darnell said. "When I found her, she looked right at me." Simone was quiet for a moment. "I'll look into it," she said. The preliminary hearing was set for a Thursday morning in early March in Courtroom B of the Harlan Creek County Courthouse. Darnell wore the only dress shirt he owned, navy blue, ironed twice. He sat at the defense table with Simone and tried not to look at Patrick Solberg, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery in a charcoal suit, his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for a business meeting to start. The judge was a man named Calloway, heavy-set, silver-haired, the kind of judge who had seen enough to stop being surprised by anything. He reviewed the complaint. He reviewed the incident log. He looked over the top of his glasses at Darnell with an expression that wasn't quite judgment, but wasn't far from it. The county prosecutor was brief. He laid out the timeline. He named the property. He pointed to the defendant. He made it sound very simple, the way prosecutors make things sound when they believe they are. Then Judge Calloway looked at Simone and said, "Counselor?" And Simone stood up and said, "Your Honor, the defense requests a brief continuance. We have reason to believe there is a witness whose testimony has not yet been considered." Patrick Solberg shifted in his seat. The prosecutor looked up from his notes. Judge Calloway tilted his head. "What witness?" "The alleged victim, Your Honor, Mrs. Harriet Solberg." A sound moved through the courtroom, not loud, not dramatic, just the particular quality of silence that comes right before something changes. The prosecutor was on his feet immediately. He cited the dementia diagnosis. He cited the medical power of attorney. He cited case precedent on the reliability of testimony from patients with cognitive impairment. He spoke for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and when he was done, Judge Calloway looked almost bored. "Can she speak?" the judge asked. "She can speak, Your Honor," Simone said. "She can identify people she knows. The question is whether the court will allow it." Judge Calloway looked at the prosecutor. Then he looked at Patrick Solberg. Then he looked at Darnell. Something crossed the judge's face. Not a smile, not exactly, but a kind of stillness that came before a decision. "I'd like to hear from Mrs. Solberg," he said. She came in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse from the memory care unit where she'd been moved following her discharge. She was wearing a lavender cardigan, and her white hair was brushed back from her face. She looked smaller than Darnell remembered, smaller and more fragile, but her eyes moved around the courtroom with a sharpness that surprised people. The bailiff had set up a small table near the front of the room. The nurse positioned the wheelchair beside it. Harriet Solberg looked at the judge, then at the prosecutor, then her gaze traveled across the defense table and landed on Darnell. Her face changed. "That's him," she said clearly. "That's the young man from the stairs." The room was completely still. The prosecutor stood up again, carefully, and asked Harriet Solberg what she remembered about that day. She told him, in her own order, in her own time, that she had been trying to go downstairs to find her son, that she had gotten confused, that she had sat down on the steps because her leg hurt. She said a young man had come through the door and sat down next to her and put something warm around her shoulders and stayed with her until other people came. She said he had held her hand. She said he had not frightened her. She said he had talked to her quietly, the way her late husband used to talk to their dog when it was scared. Then the prosecutor asked very gently whether she remembered her ring. Harriet Solberg looked down at her right hand. Then she looked up. "I took it off in the bathroom," she said. "I always take it off when I wash my hands. The clasp was loose. I left it on the sink ledge. I told the nurse." She looked across the room at Patrick. "I told the girl in the pink scrubs. I told her to put it somewhere safe." The nurse, standing behind her wheelchair, not the one from that Tuesday, a different one, but one who had been there, was looking at her shoes. The prosecutor sat down slowly. Judge Calloway looked at the prosecutor for a long moment. "Counselor," he said, "do you want to take a few minutes?" It took 11 days. The ring was located in a locked drawer at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, where a nursing assistant named Tricia Bowman had placed it for safekeeping and then forgotten to log it in the incident report because she'd been running behind and told herself she'd do it later, and then it slipped through the cracks the way things do in busy hospitals on busy nights. Tricia Bowman came forward on her own 3 days after the hearing. She brought her supervisor with her. She was crying before she finished the first sentence. The charges against Darnell Oakes were dropped on a Wednesday morning. There was no ceremony. Simone called him at work. He had gone back to his shift 2 days after the hearing, with a written apology from hospital administration that he folded twice and put in his jacket pocket, and she told him, and he sat down on the floor of the supply closet with his back against the shelving unit and breathed for a while. Patrick Solberg did not apologize. His attorney released a statement saying that his client had acted in good faith based on the information available to him at the time. Darnell read it once and never thought about it again. He had better things to do with the time he had. What nobody in Harlan Creek knew, what wouldn't come out until months later when Harriet Solberg's estate attorney was reviewing her affairs, was that she had changed her will in February, 6 weeks before she wandered into that stairwell. She had reduced Patrick's inheritance by half. She had said, when asked, that she wanted the other half to go towards something that helped people who were overlooked. She never specified further. She didn't need to. The attorney noted in the file and moved on. Darnell still works at Harlan Creek Regional Medical Center. He comes in at 6, he clocks out at 2, and he pushes his cart down the same hallways he has pushed it down for 10 years now. He learned, sometime in the months after everything happened, that Harriet Solberg had asked the nurses to send him something. He'd never received it. It had gone to an old address, then come back, then gotten lost somewhere in the hospital's mail system. He found out what it said because the nurse who had written it down read it to him one afternoon in the break room. She said Mrs. Solberg had asked her to write, "Thank you for sitting with me on the stairs. I wasn't alone because of you." He thanked the nurse. He finished his coffee. He went back to work. There is a version of this story where Darnell Oakes gets angry, where he sues Patrick Solberg for defamation, where he goes on television and tells his side, where he becomes a symbol, a headline, a hashtag, a moment. Some people, when they hear what happened, tell him he should have done those things. They say he earned it. They say he had every right. And maybe he did. But that is not the version Darnell chose. He chose the version where he shows up, where he pushes the cart and rings the mop and checks the stairwells and goes home and makes coffee and does it again tomorrow, where the people who need someone to sit with them on the stairs will find someone. The Theodore Colemans of this world, the Darnell Oakes, the ones in the gray jackets and the paper caps and the blue-collar uniforms that nobody sees until something goes wrong, they are not waiting for a headline. They are already there. They were always already there. Think about who that person is in your life, the one who stayed, the one who sat down next to you on the stairs when your leg gave out and the world got confusing and you couldn't find your way back to where you were going. Drop their name in the comments. They deserve to be seen. I keep thinking about that supply closet. Darnell sitting on the floor, back against the shelving unit, just breathing. No cameras, no crowd, nobody watching. Just a man who had done the right thing, quietly, without being asked, without expecting anything back, finding out that it had finally, after everything, been enough. That image stays with me because it's the opposite of how we usually tell stories about justice. We expect the moment to be loud. We expect the vindication to feel like a scene, music, tears, someone in the gallery standing up. But real life doesn't work that way. Real life gives you a phone call in a supply closet, and you sit down on the floor and you breathe. What Darnell had, what carried him through 9 months of suspicion and leave of absence and people crossing the street when they saw him coming, wasn't luck. It was something quieter and harder to name. He had a way of knowing what the right thing was, and doing it anyway, even when there was no reward in it. Even when it cost him time he didn't have. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of character most people spend their whole lives trying to build and never quite finish. I think about the moment in the stairwell a lot. He almost kept walking. The cart was heavy. The shift was long. He had every practical reason in the world to let someone else handle it. But there was something in him that registered that sound, that half word, half moan, and couldn't walk past it. That instinct, that refusal to look away, is what I'd call the foundation of a decent life. Not heroics, not sacrifice. Just, I see you, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. And then there's the thinking he had to do, alone, in that apartment with the blinds down. Most people, wrongly accused, either collapse or explode. Darnell did neither. He told the truth consistently, without embellishment, without anger that would have made him easy to dismiss. He trusted that the details mattered. The wall phone, the timeline, the bracelet with her name on it. He held onto the specifics when everything else was falling apart. That's not nothing. That's a kind of intelligence that doesn't show up on any test, but saves your life when you need it to. And then he just kept going. He went back to work. He pushed the cart. He ironed the same navy shirt and showed up to a courthouse in a town that had already decided who he was. And he sat at that table anyway. That takes something most people would not find in themselves. Not defiance exactly, but a deep refusal to let other people's worst assumptions become the story he lived inside. The thing about Harriet Solberg changing her will, reducing Patrick's share, directing the rest toward people who are overlooked, is that she never explained it in terms anyone could argue with. She just knew. She had sat in that courtroom in her lavender cardigan and looked across the room and known. And she had made a decision, quietly, before any of this became a story, that the people the world tends to step over deserved something more than to be stepped over. Maybe that's the whole lesson. The people who sit down next to you on the stairs when your leg gives out and the world gets confusing, they're not doing it for the will. They're not doing it for the headline. They're doing it because something in them decided a long time ago that a person in trouble is a person in trouble. And that's enough reason. I don't know how you build that in yourself. I think it takes time. I think it takes choosing over and over in small moments that nobody records to be the kind of person who doesn't keep walking. But I think it starts with noticing the sound.